G'day everyone, Viv here. I hope you're all keeping well. Welcome back. So many things are going on in the studio at the moment, and there's so many unfinished projects which I need to wrap up over the coming weeks. But last week, I showed you how to make some very simple sawdust flock. This week, we're having a look at foam flocks. Next week, we'll have a look at clump foliage. And then in the coming weeks, I'm working on some pretty cool, exciting projects, Skyrim world, that I need a lot of these natural flocks for and landscaping materials. So right now is a great time to, tick these off and get them up on the channel. So let's jump into having a look at how we make our own foam flocks. Sawdust flock looks similar to foam flock, but it's actually very different in how it behaves, specifically how it interacts with glues and sealants. We'll talk later about using flocks, but for now, let's just look at how we go about making our own foam flocks. It shouldn't come as a surprise that foam flock is made from foam. Whilst there's lots of different types of foam, the kind we're looking at here is regular polyurethane foam, not to be confused with polyurethane resin though. To make our own foam flock and all variations of it, including fine flock, coarse flock, and clump foliage, we're going to need some foam. In the past, I've used offcuts from the furniture upholstery traps across the road from the studio. I bought bags of pre-shredded foam from places like Spotlight here in Australia. You could even buy cheap offcuts from Clark's Rubber, and that would be my first preference as it's usually pretty cheap. Just make sure that whatever you're buying is light in colour, either white or yellow, and if you're buying bags of pre-shredded foam, make sure it doesn't have any of that annoying rubber material in it. That causes problems for us and is a hassle to deal with. So make sure that if you're buying those bags, it only consists of the nice foam that we need. Whether you're buying pre-shredded foam or blocks, you're going to need a good blender for this process, and ideally one that you can allocate to just hobby work. After burning out a regular kitchen blender twice, I think, I forked out some good coin for a commercial blender. I've heard of people using a spice grinder or a coffee grinder, but I've never had much luck with the cheap grinder I have. The first step is to grind up your foam. If you're using pre-shredded foam, you can pop this straight into your blender. Otherwise, you're going to need a rip or cut your foam block into smaller pieces first. Otherwise, your blender might struggle. Even my commercial blender seizes when trying to shred large chunks. If you're here in Australia, I'd highly recommend going to Clark Rubber and buying their bags of pre-shredded foam. It doesn't include any of that annoying rubber that some PU foam can be backed with, and it's just pure foam. It's perfect. I'd highly recommend it. Sadly, I didn't use that foam from Clark's Rubber. I used some foam I already had in the studio, so I had to go through and pick out all those annoying little rubber parts. I usually only do a handful or two at a time. Any more than that, and even with my commercial blender, it can seize, so you're better off doing small batches rather than destroying your blender. Pop some foam in the blender and add a bunch of water. You can't add too much water, but you can add too little, so make sure the amount of water you add is enough. I usually add several cups of water to a handful of foam. Give that a good blend in your blender. I usually run mine for about a minute. I haven't done any extensive testing, but I have noticed that whilst I am blending wet foam, it will get down to the perfect size after about a minute. I don't think it's possible to overblend it at this stage, so just make sure that you give it long enough to cut it down nice and fine. Once that's done, drain out the water and give the foam a good squeeze to remove as much water as possible. I usually let the foam dry at this stage, but sometimes I do get lazy or impatient and go ahead with the next step whilst the foam is still wet. It's not preferable though. You want the foam to absorb the paint we'll be adding, and if it's already full of water, the foam can't absorb as much paint and you can end up with inconsistent colour throughout the foam. Just add a small amount of paint and start giving the foam a good squeeze. Add more paint if the colour isn't as vibrant as you want it. There really isn't any need to add water, it just dilutes the colour. Like all terrain related projects, when it comes to paint, I use the same kind of water-based paint you'd paint your walls with at home. Take a stroll through the paint department at your local hardware store and pick whatever colours you like. One issue with using paints for this process though is that the final product won't be colour fast. And whilst I've never had any issues with colours running whilst I've been spraying foam flock with watered down glue or commercial sealants, if you really want to get professional, you can use fabric dyes like those from RIT, but I've never really found that necessary. Paint, it's just easy to use, it's accessible, cheap, it works, so I don't really see a need to move to using dyes or more complicated processes. Spread this out on some plastic. Don't use paper or cardboard, some of the foam will just end up sticking to the paper, which will go to waste. Let this dry fully, and I mean fully. If you started with wet foam before you added the paint, this can take several days to dry sometimes. If the foam was dry though, it can be much faster. If it's not completely dry, at least in my experience, you won't be able to grind it down into a super fine flock. Once this is dry, we have what we need to make coarse flock, fine flock, and clump foliage. This is the basic starting point for all of those. We'll talk about clump foliage next week, but for now, let's throw some of this back into the blender. You want to make sure the blender is clean and 100% dry. Again, for best results, I only do a handful at a time, otherwise I found that in my blender the process doesn't really work well. Simply add the coloured foam and pop your blender on. Again, I run mine for about a minute, but it's not really possible to overblend this material, but if you don't run it for long enough or you don't have a good enough blender, you won't end up with a nice fine flock. The rest is pretty simple. Well, the whole process is pretty simple actually. I use a regular kitchen sieve to sieve the foam into 2 grades. If you've used a good blender or a good spice grinder, you should end up with a fine flock and a coarse flock. If it's not as fine as you want, or you don't need the coarse flock, you could try popping it back into the blender and giving it another blast. Just make sure you sieve it between rounds so you can collect the fine flock. Overall, it's probably just easier and quicker to buy commercial products like those available from Geek Gaming or Woodlands Scenic or Knock or lots of other places, but there are some good reasons for making your own. Perhaps you want a flock with a specific colour for your alien landscape, or you want some blue fine flock for making some flowers, or some pink coarse flock for cherry blossom trees. There's lots of good reasons for being able to make your own. And there we have it. The process is pretty easy, it's pretty straightforward, it takes a little bit of time, and for those normal foams, greens and all that sort of stuff, it's probably just easier to buy them commercially rather than going through this whole process of making your own. But, you know, there are advantages and it's worth having a bit of a play. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you're all keeping well. Lots of exciting stuff coming, so please do subscribe and click that bell notification. Don't forget to like the video if you did like it, and I'll catch you soon. See ya.